2016, one of the best years of all time. Pokemon Go had just been released, Drake was dropping new albums, and Harambe was still alive. Life was good. And that was even more true for the majority of Sporting fans in 2016. Sporting were flying in the 2015-16 season, and in March they were top of the league. They had only lost one game all season, and there was real hope of ending a near 15-year title drought. The team was stacked. Islam Slimani, João Mario, William Carvalho, Adrian Silva and Rui Patricio, just to name a few, the last four being a part of Portugal's Euro 2016 triumph just a few months later. Sporting were also backed heavily by President Bruno de Carvalho, who made Jorge Jesus defect from Benfica to the crosstown rivals, making him the highest paid coach in Portugal. But it was one moment, one decision, one miss, 18 minutes from the end of a game, that remains not only a talking point and used as a metaphor of how Sporting were at the time, but also you could argue causes one of the biggest butterfly effects in football history. This is how Bryan Ruiz's miss against Benfica in 2016 changed football forever. First of all, let me preface this video by saying Bryan Ruiz was a baller. I don't care what people say about this miss. If you had watched Bryan Ruiz, you'd know that would be the case. Not only did he carve a good career at Ghent, SC Twente, PSV, Fulham and even at international level, earning 147 caps for Costa Rica, but he was on fire for Sporting since joining just over €1 million in the summer of 2015. 34 games in the league that season, 8 goals and 13 assists from the wing. Just incredible numbers. Bryan fit Jorge Jesus' system like a glove. He mainly operated as a winger, but could also play behind the forward if necessary. And no one felt this impact more than Islam Slimani, who had his best season at Sporting, scoring 27 goals in the league and 31 in all competitions. As mentioned in the intro, Bruno de Carvalho has invested heavily, not just in the squad, spending €10 million on players like Gyokeres, Naldo, Everton and the aforementioned Bryan Ruiz, but he surprisingly sacked Marco Silva, even after he won a Taça de Portugal, the English equivalent in the FA Cup, apparently due to him not wearing a club suit during a match. But let's be honest, we all know what the reason was. Bruno de Carvalho had managed to convince Jorge Jesus to join Sporting from Benfica. And I will say, I think the €5 million per year did most of the convincing, but Jorge Jesus' father did play for Sporting. And Jorge Jesus said that it was his main reason for joining Sporting, but I'll let you be the judge on which one you believe. And Sporting's 2015-16 season got off to a great start, beating Benfica in the Supertaça final, the equivalent to the Community Shield. Unfortunately, they would lose out on that season's Champions League, getting knocked out by CSK Moscow in the second qualifying round. Despite being 2-1 up in the first leg, they lost 3-1 in the second leg, despite Sporting actually scoring first in the second leg. But back to the league. Come October 25th, Sporting were unbeaten in the league. They had only drawn twice to Rio Ave and Boavista, but they still looked very good. But the big test was here. Sporting versus Benfica at the Estadio da Luz. Jorge Jesus returning to his old home as a traitor. But Sporting dominated. Not only did they win 3-0 away, they scored all 3 goals in the first half, with new signings Gyokeres scoring, Slimani also got on the score sheet, and of course, as did Bryan Ruiz. It was a brilliant team performance and one of Sporting's most famous victories at the time. From there, Sporting would win the next 7 consecutive games, including wins against Vitória Guimarães and Marítimo. The first loss, unfortunately, would come up against newly promoted União de Madeira, in which Sporting would lose 1-0. With FC Porto the game after, the whole season could have fallen apart. But Sporting, much thanks to the Dragon Slayer Islam Slimani, who scored twice, and Bryan Ruiz notching assists, would beat them, winning 2-0. Sporting would win the next 3 games, including a 6-0 spanking of Vitória Setúbal and a 3-2 win against Sporting Braga. But warning shots were being fired. After that game against Braga, Sporting only won 3 of their next 6 games, drawing to Tondela and Rio Ave at home, and arguably the most crucial draw was against Vitória Guimarães 0-0 away from home, in which William Carvalho went over to the angry Sporting fans and reminded them, hey guys, we're still in first place, everyone just calm down. What could go wrong? Meanwhile, on the other side of Lisbon, Benfica could have let that 3-0 loss derail their season. But led by Rui Vitória, a Brazilian Jonas who was having a career renaissance, Mitroglou who actually rejected Sporting to join Benfica that summer, Pizzi, and led by experience of Luizão, Julio César and Eliseu, but also some young talents coming through, such as Renato Sanchez, Grimaldo, Nelson Semedo and Ederson. Since losing to Sporting, they only dropped points 2 more times leading up to the 5th of March 2015, losing 3-1 to Porto and drawing to União de Madeira. But they won 16 of their last 18 games, with Jonas ending up having 32 goals in the league and 36 in all competitions. But it was the 5th of March, a game that would end up being the title decider. Sporting versus Benfica at the José Alvalade. Sporting 1 point clear and had already beaten Benfica 2 times this season, and in my opinion were the clear favourites at home. And if Sporting won this match, they'd be 1 step closer to ending a title drought that had nearly lasted 15 years. If Benfica had won, in their minds, natural order would be restored, and they would laugh at Sporting for even attempting to dream. The whistle blew at Acela Alvalade, and the game got underway. Despite Sporting having more possession and more shots in the first half, Benfica took the lead through Mitroglou. Once the second half got underway, the game was a lot more fiery. Benfica would pick up 5 yellow cards, a mixture of bad fouls and time wasting. There was a desperation from Sporting in this game. They would have 4 shots in the second half, but only 1 on target. But in the 72nd minute, a great pass found Islam Slimani in the box, who squared it across goal to a wide open Bryan Ruiz. No one around him, the goalkeeper already on the floor, and it was just an open goal. Time stood still. This was the moment that would bring Sporting back into the game, and the way the momentum was swinging even helped them win the game. Even a draw would have been a decent result. All Bryan had to do was tap it in. Just tap it in.
All you got to do is just tap it in. Just tap it in now.
If he were to score this, he would have scored twice in as many games as Sporting's arch rival. And the Costa Rican was on clinical form this season, so surely there's no way he misses this easy chance. But in the blink of an eye, the finish ended up over the bar and out for a goal kick. And like Sporting's title hopes, it was gone in an instant. In all fairness, to give Benfica some credit, Ederson does get a hand on the cross to cause the ball to bobble a little bit, but it is still no excuse. Bryan Ruiz just had to tap it in and he sent it over the bar. And as the final whistle blew, Benfica had leapfrogged Sporting into first place. And even though both teams would go unbeaten for the rest of the season, it wasn't enough. Benfica would take the title and Sporting would be left empty-handed. Even though it was a great season for the likes of Islam Slimani and the João Mario and even a Bryan Ruiz, it wouldn't matter. The 15-16 season, to most Sporting fans and other fans of Liga Portugal clubs, is only remembered for one thing: that Bryan Ruiz miss. So I spoke in the intro about butterfly effects and the fallout, so let me get into this. So what was the fallout for Bryan Ruiz? The Costa Rican playmaker was never the same after that miss, in all honesty. The season after, he was okay, but definitely a downwards trajectory for him. He only scored 3 times and got 8 assists in 42 games. The next season, he would play 33 times in 17-18, scoring twice and getting 3 assists, but mostly in off-the-bench cameos. And unfortunately, it was the end of that season that Sporting cut their losses, selling Bryan Ruiz to Santos in Brazil for free. Did he do well at Santos, you ask? Not really. He only played 14 games for Santos, totaling 400 minutes, and only registered 2 assists. Second season, he failed to register a single appearance under manager Jorge Sampaoli, and even after a new manager came in, former Sporting manager Josualdo Ferreira, he still wasn't picked for the team. And in the end, Bryan terminated his contract with the club. However, it's not all doom and gloom for Bryan. This story does have a happier ending for him. On the 23rd of July 2020, Bryan Ruiz announced his return to his boyhood club in Costa Rica and bear with me with the pronunciation, Alajuelense. Alajuelense. He would play 108 games across all competitions in his second spell, scoring 12 goals and getting 15 assists. And in November 2022, Bryan Ruiz was named for the 26-man squad for the 2022 FIFA World Cup, and it would be his final tournament for Costa Rica, as in December 2022, he officially retired from the professional game, and marked the occasion by participating in a friendly between his club and former club ST20. Bryan Ruiz recently did an interview about the miss, and this is what he said. That game against Benfica was very hard because of what that miss meant. In the end, we lost the championship by 1 point, and after so many years without winning, it's very frustrating. I saw Messi, Ronaldo, and Lewandowski miss identical or even worse chances. That chance meant a lot to Sporting, and if I hadn't have missed, I would have stayed at the club longer and lived in Portugal. This is where the butterfly effect starts to begin. Because for Sporting, and I've already spoken about this on this channel many times, I've even made a full video on it, but of course this miss would incidentally lead to Sporting finishing third in the next 2 consecutive seasons and would lead to the attacks on the academy. So let's break the butterfly effects down. First of all, to the immediate consequences. Benfica's dominance continues. They would win titles for the next 2 consecutive seasons and Sporting's frustrations would deepen. Bruno de Carvalho has his presidency destabilised as pressure builds from missing out on titles and Europe. And the squad unrest grows and eventually erupts into the infamous 2018 Alcochete Academy attacks. Then we've got the post-attack fallout in 2018, where Bruno de Carvalho was ousted as president and Frederico Varandas is elected president. There is a mass exodus of contract rescissions. Rui Patricio, William Carvalho, Gelson Martins, Rafael Leao and more, reshaping Sporting's squad entirely. And the financial strain forces Sporting into a more sell to survive mode, which of course becomes the base of their later rebirth and rebuild. So here are some of the knock-on effects that football is still feeling today. Raphinha did leave a year after the academy attacks. He develops at Stade Rennes, sold to Leeds and then to Barcelona, where he's currently one of the best players in football. The appointment of Rúben Amorim comes soon after, a bold, expensive gamble for 10 million euros from Braga. This would of course lead to the 2020-21 league title, in which Sporting ended a 19-year drought, signing the likes of Pedro Gonçalves, who of course scored that wonder goal against Arsenal, Manuel Ugarte, who of course went on to move to Manchester United, Pedro Porro, who went on to move to Spurs and win the Europa League. Nuno Mendes is promoted from the B team to the first team and is sold to PSG and they win a Champions League. João Palhinha is resurrected by Rúben Amorim after being ousted at Sporting originally and was sold to Fulham, then Bayern Munich and is now at Tottenham. Rúben Amorim himself of course got global recognition and was appointed Manchester United manager in 2025. After winning the 2021, 23-24 and 24-25 titles, technically the last one maybe he didn't win, but definitely had a hand in it at least, and he leads Sporting into a new golden age and is currently trying to rebuild Manchester United. You can also look at Victor Gyokeres, who as a result of this miss is brought into Sporting and stars under Rúben Amorim and is eventually sold to Arsenal in 2025. And there are many other players that have gone from Sporting as a result of that miss and the rebuild that Rúben Amorim had to do and Varandas had to do. Because if you think about it, if that miss goes in from Bryan Ruiz, Bruno de Carvalho and Jorge Jesus are both held in a different light. They're the guys who brought Sporting back to the big time after 15 years without a title. And of course, Jorge Jesus would actually go on to win the Copa Libertadores after that with Flamengo. So maybe that doesn't happen if he stays at Sporting and Sporting win. Or maybe he moves earlier. He doesn't get to go to Fenerbahce, Al Hilal, Al Nassr, etc. Who knows what happens to Jorge Jesus in this scenario? There are some other ripples as well, such as the Real Betis 2022 Copa del Rey, in which William Carvalho played a starring role, having left Sporting due to the academy attacks. Sporting's revival, of course, pushed by Rúben Amorim, but also pushed Liga Portugal further into the spotlight, especially in European competitions, and Sporting would make the round of 16 of the Champions League for the first time in over 11 years. The talent development pipeline also increases, Sporting's academy and scouting regains prestige, producing and selling high-profile players such as the aforementioned Nuno Mendes, but of course you've got guys like Giovanni Kenda, Eduardo Quaresma, Gonzalo Inacio, Renato Veiga, the list goes on. Benfica and Porto's stranglehold on the league was broken, and the league is becoming even more competitive between the big three. And you could argue maybe if Sporting score that miss from Bryan Ruiz, maybe that happens earlier, but who really knows? So basically, Bryan Ruiz's miss equals Benfica's title, Sporting's crisis, Bruno de Carvalho's downfall, the academy attacks, Verandas, Rúben Amorim, Sporting's renaissance, titles, transfers, and even more managerial and player exports. But I think for me, if this miss doesn't happen, Rúben Amorim is never appointed the manager of Sporting. Because you see, I would argue that if Bryan Ruiz didn't miss this, and of course the games against Porto and Braga after would change, but Jorge Jesus would be regarded in a different light. He would be the man who led Sporting to a title. Same with Bruno de Carvalho. He would be the man who ended Sporting's title drought and made them a sustainable club. But with everything that happened after that miss, you probably don't get Rúben Amorim that gets appointed to Sporting. You probably don't get the likes of Pedro Porro going to Sporting and reinventing his career to join Spurs and winning the Europa League. You probably don't get the promotions of Nuno Mendes, Eduardo Quaresma, Gonzalo Inacio, Mateus Fernandes, Dario Isugo, Giovanni Kenda. The list goes on. It is a really crazy butterfly effect to think about, but still, I think it all leads down to that one moment that Bryan Ruiz was unable to convert the chance, and how the whole of football changed from that moment. All that consequences from one moment, one missed opportunity in a split-second decision. The moral of the story is, 1 second, one decision can change the trajectory of your entire life. Or at least the trajectory of the ball into Rosette. That is the end of this video, ladies and gentlemen. Let me know what you thought about it. What do you think about this butterfly effect? Do you remember when Bryan Ruiz missed that? Sorry Sporting fans for bringing it up, I know it's sensitive. Even though we've won 3 titles since, it still hurts to see that. And is used as a joke, I guess, on Sporting fans still, even though we've won 3 titles since then. But yeah, it did definitely sum up Sporting in that era. But what do you think of Bryan Ruiz? Is he fairly remembered at Sporting? Do you think he's unfairly remembered? Let me know what you think in the comments. Also, follow me on Twitter, link is in the description. I've been Sam Fonseca. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time, and peace.